Jabril Robinson was murdered May 16, 2016 in Clayton County, Georgia. Officer Charlie McDaniel radioed for backup, in which Dwayne Parkins was dispatched to the scene. Once Dwayne Parkins arrived on the scene, he came in contact with my son and immediately shot him in the back of his head.
Harry Baxter Jr. was killed by Oakland police on January the 16th, 2011. He ran up the street, and the neighbors of seeing him run up both streets, and they said he was zigzagging, and they were and there was a guy chasing him and shooting at him, and he hit him in the back with a bullet, and Carrie fell to the ground.
Marquise Jones was killed by San Antonio police. On that day, I was getting ready for work, and I saw there was a shooting at Chacho's and Chalucci's around 5 in the morning. And I remember saying they need to close their restaurant down because it is always someone being killed there. There's always fights there, always this. And I see the yellow chalk tarp, and I say, Lord, bless their family. I could hear my sister crying, who is Marquise's son, saying they killed him. I remembering I could not breathe. I could not catch my breath.
Jacob Dominguez was murdered by San Jose Police Department on September 15, 2017. Officer Michael Pena, part of a covert response unit, on unmarked cars, no sirens, no lights, plainclothes officers boxed in Jacob, killing him within 20 seconds of having him contained. No de-escalation. After he was dead, they put in the canine to maul up his throat.
My name is Monty Benjamin, the mother of Javis Benjamin, who was killed by Officer Lynn Thomas of the Avondale State Police Department on January 18, 2013. Javis was not looking in the direction of Officer Thomas. He was engaging with the people in the community. Officer Thomas began to move backwards. Javis then looked in his direction. At this time, Officer Thomas then shot Javis twice, once in the heart and the other in the lower abdomen with his hands raised.
My name is Adrienne Hood, the mother of Henry Green V, who was killed by 2 plainclothes police officers here in Columbus, Ohio, June 6 of 2016. Many of the witnesses that were outside said that the officers never identified themselves. They jumped out the vehicle, all while firing at my son. My son, Henry, was shot 8 times from a total of 22 bullets that were fired at him. And he lay on the sidewalk and took his last breaths.
My name is Janet Baker. My son was heinously murdered by someone who was supposed to serve and protect him. When I wake up in the morning, my son is the first thing on my mind. When I go to bed at night, I labor. Did I do the right things? Did I make the right calls? Did I align myself with the right groups? Did I speak out for justice enough? Or did I say the wrong things? Did I somehow hinder getting justice for it?
My name is Jeralynn Brown-Blueford, the mother of Alan Blueford, who was killed by Oakland Police Department officer Miguel Masso on May the 6th of 2012. Alan, who was not under arrest, not read any Miranda rights, began to leave. As he was walking away from the scene, the police officer turned off his lapel camera and began to chase Alan. Alan was running, according to witness statements, yelling, "I didn't do anything." The officer took out his weapon, shooting himself in the foot. Alan heard the gunshot and fell to the ground with hands up. According to witness statements, the police officer walked over to Alan as he was lying on the ground and shot him in his chest 3 times.
My name is Sheila Banks, the godmother and auntie of Corey Jones that was killed by Newman Roger, October 18, 2015. Police officer Newman Roger approached him, and within a few seconds or so, Corey was running for his life. He was shot at 6 times. He was hit 3 times. And boy, I tell you, our lives have never been the same.
My name is Kathy Scott Lights, mother of Jarvis Lights, who was killed by a Georgia State Trooper on December 29, 2017. They stated that Jarvis exited his vehicle. There was no body cam or dash cam to confirm this statement. It was reported that Jarvis attempted to return back to his car when Officer Nolan attacked him from the back of his body. Jarvis came back up out of his car after he found what he was searching for with his arms raised in the air. State Trooper Nolan stated that he didn't know what that object was in Jarvis' hand, and he shot Jarvis in his right upper shoulder arm. And the object that was in Jarvis' hand was his cell phone, which was found next to his body after he had been shot on the ground, bleeding out.
Welcome everyone to Voices of Struggle and Hope, Mothers Speak Out on Police Brutality. This is the 4th of 10 dialogues with mothers from 10 different cities, women who have suffered the loss of a child to deadly police violence. Mothers Against Police Brutality is presenting these programs, which will be held at 12 noon and 7 p.m. Central Time all this week. I'm John Fullenwider, a longtime human rights activist and organizer in Dallas, Texas, and I will be moderating this session. Colette Flanagan, who is the founder of Mothers Against Police Brutality, and I'll be moderating different sessions with her. Colette founded MAPB in 2013 after her son, Clinton Allen, was shot to death by a Dallas police officer. Clinton was 25 years old, a father of twin toddler boys at the time, and he was unarmed when he was shot 7 times by a Dallas officer. He was shot once in his upper arm as if it were raised. He was shot 5 times in the chest, and he was shot 1 time at close range in the back. The officer who killed Clinton never faced any accountability, not within the Internal Affairs Department, not at the grand jury. There was never an indictment, never a trial. In fact, he's on the Dallas police force today. Colette often says that she turned her grief into fuel to build a struggle for justice for her son and for others killed by the police in the United States every year. She asked me and another activist, Sarah Mokuria, who had lost her own father as a child to police violence, to help her start the group. In the last couple of years, Mothers Against Police Brutality has focused on 2 major initiatives. The first is taking the crisis in policing in this country to the United Nations. And we have participated in several forums in 2020 and 2021. And this year, Colette spoke in Geneva just last month to the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, lifting up the use of deadly force and police brutality in America, particularly against Black people and other people of color. Our second major initiative in the past couple of years has been the Mothers Against Police Brutality Fellowship Legacy Program. We had a lot of applicants for this program, over 150, and we chose 10 moms who had been through this horrible experience and who they were already effective advocates for their children and had already done a lot of community organizing very effectively in their hometowns and beyond. And many of them have the staying power that you need to make a change, have been working on it for years now. Through the fellowship, we try to support these women in their local work, try to extend their contacts throughout the country, and try to help them develop new skills and experiences, have new experiences that will, we hope, make them, and we know, will allow them to become leaders in the larger national movement to change policing. And they're already leaders in MAPB's plans to create a nationwide network among families who've suffered this terrible crime centered on the moms. And that brings us to Mrs. Jeralynn Brown-Blueford, who is an MAPB fellow from Oakland, California. And we're going to hear a lot more about her story in a few minutes, but I just want to welcome her to the program. It's good to see you, Ms. Blueford.
Thank you, John. I'm so glad and privileged and honored to be here.
Thank you. We have before we go deeper into her experiences, let me introduce our panel. First, we have Claria Holmes. She's a graduating senior, majoring in psychology and Black studies at the University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And she is going to pursue a master's degree in counseling and psychology after graduation. But we met her because she's an honors college scholar at the University of Southern Mississippi. And her honors thesis has to do with the experiences of mothers who have lost their children to police violence. So welcome, Ms. Holmes. We're glad to have you here. Tell us a little bit more about your research.
Yes, thank you for having me tonight. Like Mr. Fullenwater said, I'm a graduating senior honors college scholar at the University of Southern Mississippi, and we're tasked to write an honors thesis. And something that really struck me in 2020 at the height of the Black Lives Matter protest was this sign. I remember seeing this sign that a young woman was holding, and the sign said, when George Floyd called for his own mother, that resonated with mothers everywhere. And that got me thinking about an experience that I don't often hear about, which is the experience of mothers who have unfortunately had their children taken from them too soon. And so as I started looking at things to research for my thesis, I realized that this was an important perspective to center. And so, like I said, I'm honored that Mothers Against Police Brutality has allowed me to be here tonight. And I'm, open to listening to y'all's stories. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for being here and welcome. Our other panelist is Kat Brooks, an award-winning actress and playwright working in Oakland with the Lower Bottom Players and in San Francisco with the Three Girls Theater as a resident writer and performer. She's also a very effective organizer in the Bay Area, and she played a central role in the struggle for justice for Oscar Grant, whom many of in our audience will remember was murdered by a Bay Area transit cop in 2009. She has spent the last decade working with impacted communities and families to rapidly respond to police violence. She is the co-founder of the Anti-Police Terror Project and the executive director of the Justice Teams Network. Ms. Brooks, thanks for being here. I'm familiar with the Anti-Police Terror Project and with MH First. And I wonder if you just tell us a little bit about MH First. It's one of the most effective non-police response programs to mental crisis.
Yeah, so I'll just, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Hi, Mama Jeralynn. I love you so much. So APTP has been in existence for going on 15 years at this point. And we, as you mentioned, really were born out of the execution of Oscar Grant. And we wanted to be not just reactionary, but visionary, right? So pre-BLM, right, we were in the streets thousands at a time, but we had to ask ourselves why we were only responding after the state moved. Why were we only responding to state violence instead of trying to stop it in the first place? And being trained organizers, you know, we're students of movement and data driven. And so we started to look at like, what would it take to end? Our mission is literally to eradicate state terror in communities of color. And what would that mean? How do we get there? And the answer came back resoundingly. The only way that that's ever going to happen is to reduce the amount of engagement our communities have with law enforcement. So then we started looking at all of the places that law enforcement is enmeshed inside of our communities where they do not need to be. And it didn't always used to be this way. That's a different history lesson for another panel, but it didn't always, it wasn't always like this. And so the first place we started, we saw was clearly mental health crisis, right? Upwards of 50% of people that are murdered by law enforcement are in the middle of a mental health crisis. When you intersect that with Black bodies, that number goes up dramatically. And so why were we sending a badge and a gun when we needed to send was care and compassion? And so, yeah, we launched MH First a little over 2 years ago. We are Oakland and Sacramento's only non-911 response to mental health crisis. We also respond to substance abuse issues, domestic violence. We actually just released last Monday our guide on responding to IPV without law enforcement. We train both municipalities and grassroots organizations across the country. And use communications also as an additional strategy, not a tactic, right? To shift the way the public understands what public safety really is and should be, and what police do and do not do.
Thank you very much. I had the pleasure of meeting Asanteway Boykin a couple of years ago when she participated in some online discussions with county officials here that we had put together, some of the organizers here had put together.
Yeah, she's the co-founder of APTP and the co-creator of Mental Health First, and was perfect to lead this charge because she had spent her entire nursing career in mental health facilities, both witnessing the intersection of law enforcement and Black bodies in mental health crisis, but also intervening in that intersections. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks for being here. Ms. Blueford, I wonder if you would start us by just telling us about your son, Alan. What kind of person was Alan?
Thank you, John. Excuse me. Alan Dwayne Blueford was born on December 20th of 1993. Alan is the youngest child. Alan was the friend everybody wanted to have. He made friends with everyone that he came across. Still to this day, whenever I see a teacher, whether I see a friend, everybody said, "Oh, I know Alan, he was my best friend." There was elderly, he would give out candy for the older people that couldn't get up and go to the door to hand out trick-or-treat candy. He would help, he played sports a lot, and he would help other teammates to bring up their level of play by coaching them or giving them advice and showing them how to do certain things. He was, I'm his mom, and I'm not just trying to brag, but he was very, very, very smart in math. His math teacher gave him an assignment, and she said to do it, and he just couldn't add numbers in his head. And she thought that, well, did you cheat because you didn't show your work? And so he told her exactly what he did. And she called me to the class that afternoon, and she said, "Mrs. Blueford, whatever he does in life, make sure that it's with numbers. I've never seen this. And he became the student tutor in the class. He also, he was just the person that whatever he tried, he excelled, and he had a big heart. If we drove by and there was a homeless person out, he would say, "Mom, give him a couple of dollars," and he just had this exuberant light that shined wherever he went. And so people gravitated to him, his brothers and sisters, everyone. It was just, he was not very big in size, but they called him Little Al, but it became Big Al by the time he was 7 because he did big things. And when he was 7 years old, his dad asked him, "Alan, what do you want to do when you grow up?" He said, "I don't know, Dad, but whatever it is, it will be big." So, that's just a short synopsis about Alan. He is sorely, sorely missed. And I'm often asked things about him. And this young man who was about 18 years old, one day I was handing out flyers to bring awareness to what had happened to Alan at the Fruitvale BART station where Oscar was taken from us. And the young man said, "That's your son? Oh my God, I saw you on the news." He said, "If they killed him, I have no hope." And that just resonated with me. One, because Alan's life touched his life, and another because he felt as if he had no hope. Alan had a 3.0 grade point average upon graduation. He was poised to graduate, walking the stage, and he worked for the Oakland Unified School District, helping handicapped students, helping out in the cafeteria, working in the office for the vice principal. He just had that personality, and you knew that he was loyal and you could depend on him. And so I know right now, although he is not physically with me, he's dependent on me to make change. Because if the roles were reversed and it was I that was taken from him, he would be out on the front lines saying justice for my mom. A lot of times it's kind of hard. When it first happened, all I could do, it's a pain that is indescribable. And I would go out to speak, and the only time that I could be strong was when I was speaking about Alan, when I was speaking about justice, when I was, being told that I couldn't do this and they couldn't tell me this, and they were doing all kinds of things, backdoor deals and everything. I knew then, vengeance is mine, said the Lord. And he will avenge me of my adversary. And I don't mean that in a way of, I'm going to go. It was a time when I felt that I wanted to do something to take, to get payback or to, fight back. But I knew that Alan would see it differently. John, it was many nights that I didn't sleep. I had insomnia really bad, and they tried to give me antidepressants and sleep med, but nothing worked. I just couldn't sleep. And one night I finally fell asleep, and I was dreaming that I was with my granddaughter. She was 3 years old at the time. And we were walking by the pool, and my granddaughter fell in, and I'm not a good swimmer. I don't really know how too much. And I had to dive in to save her. And I pulled her out, but I began to sink. And as I was sinking, I heard Alan's voice, and it was saying, "No, go, kick, stroke, you can do it, go." And as I began to kick, then I began to float, and I began to stroke, and he was going, "You got it, you can do it." And at that time, I woke up. I was sweating, and I was like, wow, I slept. And a lot of people say that their loved ones come to them in a dream, but that was the only time. But he was saying, you can do this. Go. Don't give up the fight. And I'm in this fight until my last days here on this earth.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing the Alan that as he was. I'm sure in the aftermath of the shooting, you might not even recognize the person that was described by the police, you know, or in the media. And this is it's common and it's always horrible when it happens, but the first run on someone who gets killed by the police is usually what a bad person they were. There's usually an attempt to dehumanize them so that no one should care about their death and make it look justified regardless of the facts. And we've seen this a lot. The story that we saw you briefly describe in the video reminded me of a case in Dallas. I'm pretty old, it looks like, and I am old. But I graduated from high school in 1970. And there was a young man my age who was killed that spring. And he was unarmed, he was running from police. He fell down and he was shot multiple times. His name was Michael Moorhead. And I often think of that shooting as the start of the modern era of police brutality in Dallas. And I share that story, I guess, because what I'm getting ready to ask you is, could be kind of painful, but I know you've told the story many times, but I wonder if you could take us back to May the 6th, 2012, and walk us through what happened that day and the aftermath.
May 6, 2012 was a Saturday. And Alan had just gone to prom, his senior prom, 2 weeks prior. On May 6th, people were out celebrating. May 5th was Cinco de Mayo, and that was a Saturday. And people were out celebrating Cinco de Mayo. And Alan had a couple of friends over, another 18-year-old young man and a 15-year-old. And it's the same day as the Floyd Mayweather fight. And so he asked if he could go to watch the fight at his friend's house. And I was a little bit reluctant that day. I don't know why, but I was like, no. And he was like, come on, Mom, it'll be fine. We're going to watch the fight. And he loved boxing. He loved sports. So I was like, well, clean up that room before you go. So he was like, okay. So he went in, he cleaned up the room. And then he said, you don't have to worry because the young man's father was going to pick them up from our house. And then they were going to go back to his house and watch the fight and have food. And there was a couple of people over. And so I said, okay. And as they were waiting for the young man's father, I turned to Alan. I said, well, don't go. I said, why don't you just stay here with me? And he was like, well, Mom, I want to see the fight. And you didn't pay for the fight. And I could see it free. And I was like, well, no, just stay with me. And he was like, I'll be back, okay? And I said, okay. But I was reluctant to let him go for whatever reason. And then the young man's dad came, and Alan had left his phone in the car, and my husband was gone because he was supposed to go to the gym with his dad, but he didn't go. He wanted to see the fight. And so they go to the friend's house. They watched the fight, and Floyd Mayweather knocked the opponent out in the first ring. It didn't even last too long. So after, Alan said, I left my phone and I need to go back and get it. And then they were in touch with some young ladies that they were going to meet up with, and they were going to give them a ride back home. So in the meantime, while they were waiting for the young ladies, they decided to walk to the corner store to get candy. And they later, 7 years later, I found out that Oakland police have footage of this, but they didn't tell us that when this happened. So he walks in the store, he buys something, he comes out, and they're waiting in front of the store, which is on a corner, for the girls to pick them up. While waiting, he calls in and checks in with his dad. And his dad said, because usually he'll call, we'll go get them. He said, no, Dad, you don't have to come get me. We're waiting on some girls to come give us a ride, and then I'll be coming home. And my husband's response was, well, it's getting late, and so you need to come on home. He said, okay, Dad. He hung up. While waiting, then he's accosted by an unmarked police vehicle. No lights, no sirens, nothing. It's just these 3 young African-American males, and this car come belting up. Now, mind you, the police officer had a call to go to a domestic violence call that was blocks away. But he sees these African-American young men and decide to go and razz them. So he pulls up, gets out, all hard, gets out and jumps out of the car. And he just takes one of them and throws him on the ground, takes the other young man and throw him up against the fence, twisting his arm behind his back. Alan is watching all this. No arrests, no Miranda rights, no anything. So as he sees his friends getting thrown around, now another car comes up with the partner or whatever, another police car, unmarked. And while they're detaining the other two, Alan starts to leave. As he starts to leave, the one Masso who's twisting the young man's arm against his back decides he's going to go after Alan. So he turns off his camera. Alan looks, he starts to run. The police officer starts chasing Alan 5 city blocks. As Alan is running, he's saying, looking behind, I didn't do anything. He's still running. This guy is just enraged. Witness statement says he looked very aggressive. He's running all hard. He's chasing him. He pulls out his weapon, shoots himself. Alan turns around, he hears, he falls down on his back. I didn't do anything, he yells. That's from the witness statement. The cop is bleeding from the leg, the foot, goes over to Alan, stands over him, shoots him 3 times, center mass. 1 of the bullets went through his armpit, 3 went in his chest, hitting him. Alan's last words was, why did you shoot me? Then the police officer gets on the call, officer shot, officer shot. The other police officer who were with the young men shoots in the car, pulls up, puts the police officer in the car and drives off. Now, on a week after the shooting, we had organized a big march to bring awareness. We wanted to know what happened. They told us that Alan shot the police officer twice. Alan did not have a gun, but they did find a gun at the scene, 20 feet away from Alan's body. Now, if Alan would have shot him, the pistol would have been by him. If Alan would have shot him, it would have been in his right hand because he was right-handed. If Alan would have shot him, it would have had his DNA on it. But the police officers lied and said there was a partial left thumbprint, which my son was right-handed, and there was Hispanic DNA. Officer Masso is Hispanic. Alan was right-handed, mind you. He did not shoot the police. He did not have a gun, and they did not want to investigate this. They called in the retired police chief from 30 miles away to come to the scene, which I live in the city of Tracy, which is 30 miles away from Oakland, give or take. And why would they call the Tracy police instead of getting people there to do the investigation? They had all the resources. They also had first responders, but the people that were there first on the scene, they dismissed them and pulled in officers who were retired or on their agenda. They also, a 9-year-old boy told me while we were marching that boy, I saw that boy, he was on the ground and they picked him up and they put him in the car. And then when all the other police started coming, they took him out and laid him on the ground. Somehow that young boy and his mother was moved out of that neighborhood. The witness that the police had was a Hispanic young girl who gave the same narrative as the police, but none of it matched up to the matching evidence. All of this went on. When we got the word, it was from the father of one of the young men to go to OPD and see something bad happen. They just let them out. You need to find out what happened. As we go down to the police office department, they tell us to have a seat. My husband and I are trying to know our son. We heard he's been hurt. We're looking, we need to find out if he's okay, what is going on. They say, have a seat. We'll get to you in a minute. They left us there for an hour. I'm crying because nervous. The lady behind the information booth slides me a number and says, call this number. We call, it's the lieutenant of homicide. He says, comes downstairs and tells us that our son was in a gun battle. And my husband said, no, that can't be. That's not my son. Are you sure? You might not have the right person. Well, no, the person didn't have any ID. We don't know who he is. Alan left home because I gave him $10. He left home with his wallet, his Skyline High School ID, and $10 cash. But his ID was gone. And the young men who were detained along with Alan told me that when the police came in the car, they told them, you're going to jail for homicide. You're going to jail for homicide. They're like, what do? We don't know nothing. But they were making up a narrative. And they did tell us that Alan was deceased. And my husband said, come on, let's go. And we left. But we knew we had to do something because they were lying. Immediately, they got on the news and started victimizing my Alan. Now, I'm not saying that Alan Blueford was perfect because he was not. He did things that were wrong. He suffered the consequence. He knew the Lord. He was not perfect. But with that being said, they came out with a story about how he shot this police officer twice, how it was a gun battle, like he was just this, enraged person. But here's this 18-year-old kid. And then when we had to literally sue for the police report, sue for the coroner's report, countless marches, shut down the city council. We were trying everything to get information and they wouldn't. And they closed the case and called it justified homicide in 2 weeks. The district attorney took the side of the officer who, and when he gave his statement, said, well, it was the fault of Oakland Police Department for hiring me because they know I suffered from post-traumatic stress from the war. And they took that. But we put up a fight, John. We put up a fight. We fought to get that police report. We fought to get the coroner's report. And when we got the coroner's report, Alan had no gunpowder on his hands, no residue, nothing that they said. They even tried to say he was selling marijuana, no drug, nothing. Every lie that they tried to tell, the evidence kept dispelling that. So we kept fighting, we fought a suit because they violated his civil rights. He had every right to leave. He was not under arrest. And we battled back and forth, but you have to remember this is in 2012, Trayvon Martin's case. They had all the proof in the world. But what did they do? They let that man go free. They wanted to move Alan's case from Oakland, and they took us to San Francisco, and they said if we would take it to trial, it would have to be in Marin. I knew that would not be a jury of his peers. I knew that they were putting out things to brainwash the community, but the community stood up. The community fought back. They stood with us. And so we kept fighting. We filed the suit. We did not, they gave us a settlement. I did not want to go to court because I felt like if it went to trial, that they would do what they did to Trayvon Martin or countless other people, trying to move us away. And I knew that if they were trying to pay, that was an admission of guilt, and I needed that. And so it's never about any money. But since I've been a fellow with Mothers Against Police Brutality, I had a journalist who followed Alan's case call me up because he sued Oakland Police Department for the rights. There's been a law passed now that we can have information about the officer's previous past.
Right.
During Alan's case, that wasn't happening. They didn't want to give us anything about, but let me tell you about Masso. He was from New York. He beat and tased an inmate. He denied him medical treatment. He gave him nerve damage. They sued him and the state of New York. And 6 months later, he left that department. In 6 months, he came to Oakland and he killed Alan. Not only that, did the journalist share with me the report, the redacted report from Oakland police, all the things that they didn't tell the family, all the things that they left out. And there were over 15 policy violations done on that night that Officer Masso did to Alan. Let me back up to court. When we were going to court, we obtained 2 high-profile lawyers to represent us. On the day that I was at court, the lawyer sent in a representative who told the judge that we did not have enough evidence, and my other attorney did not show. And so that was another reason why I felt it was important to take the settlement, because my own lawyer wouldn't even stand up for me. He left me hanging, left Alan hanging. And so now that I am a fellow and I found out more evidence, they're trying to say, oh, we can't reopen this, oh, we can't do that, but we're not done yet. I've only begun to fight. I was fighting before, but I am fighting full-fledged now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking us through that. We are going to reflect on this crisis in policing, and we want to do it grounded in your experience and what happened to Alan. And I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Brooks and Ms. Holmes. I just want to note a couple of things. One, the encounter started with a unmarked police car. The young man may not have even known the guy was a police officer when he first approached him. 2, this officer had a long history, as you found out years later, of
we found that out. We had to do our own investigation. So we found that out through our attorneys and throughout our investigation that we had to dig those things out. And
it
I
wasn't years though. Mama.
No, it was right away.
We had that early on.
Okay.
Our campaign work. Yeah.
Well, my only point was that he had a record of misconduct, and that often happens. And often the misconduct will escalate. We've seen it where you have a video of a police officer trying to run down a suspect, and then 3 or 4 years later they shoot a suspect. And so the other thing is the treatment of the family. In the aftermath of these shootings, it's almost like a second violation of the family, the way that y'all were treated. And there's other aspects of this, and I'm sure Kat and Claria will bring them out. I just want to say that one other thing that shines through in your situation and in your telling of the story is that sometimes a family may be broken by the loss of a child, especially to police violence. Any murder is horrible, but police murders has an extra dimension. But I think that anyone listening can hear that did not happen to you all, that this crime and tragedy awakened in you a fire for justice, and it has been 10 years and you are still on it. And I can't tell you how much I admire your courage and stay in power, because that's what the movement needs, of course. But let me ask Kat for your reflections, and then we'll go to Claria. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You know, I remember where I was standing when I heard about Alan's murder. I was cooking dinner in my kitchen and I had the news on and my back was towards the television. And by that point in time in Oakland, whenever a police murder happened, we had white allies that were listening to scanners, and they would reach out to APTP because we have a rapid response model where we train communities to respond rapidly to investigate police murders. And so we had heard about the shooting, and then I was cooking dinner and the team was on its way out. And the first thing they said was that Alan had shot. But to your point, John, the Black male suspect had shot this police officer, right? There's so many things that are so egregious about this case. Absolutely, he's in Oakland at night in the flats. It made absolutely sense. It made absolute sense that they would run from a car that rolled up on them that did not identify itself. And I'll take it one step further. It would have made sense if the car had been marked and it was clearly a cop in the flats of Oakland for them to run, even if they weren't doing anything wrong. At that time, it's important to note that the Oakland Police Department was one of the most murderous police departments in Northern California. That has only shifted because of the movement that we were able to build here. And part of that movement was definitely the fight for justice for Alan Blueford and standing with Mama Jeralynn and her family. It's important to sit with the fact that Miguel Masso has made 2 lateral moves. That's what they're called, lateral moves in his career. And it's something that cops do often. They commit a heinous crime, as he did in New York. Actually, he had several misconduct complaints and acts of violence on his record. He made a quiet lateral move into the city of Oakland. When that happens, because it was before the legislation 1420 that Mama Jeralynn was talking about. And I do have to correct, it was not the journalists who got that legislation passed. It was a statewide coalition of community activists and organizers that got that legislation passed.
I remember that. That's true.
Yeah, we did that. That journalist likes to take credit for that. But he's a white dude and he's taking credit for the work of Black and brown folks and families who fought for that legislation, right? I digress. So Miguel Masso made that lateral move to Oakland. And Mama J didn't get to talk about this. We ran him up out of here, right? So we had wanted posters for Miguel Masso all over the city of Oakland, wanted for murder. Miguel Masso would be on his beat and people would recognize him if he had pulled somebody off, and they would surround his cop car. We ran communications campaigns. We got a hold of his record and we ran him out. OPD would have kept him, but he made another lateral move to Gilroy, right, Mama J?
Yeah, it's down there by
Gilroy, right? There's
Hollister.
This other small town. And what I need to say about that is so Mama J and I are very, very close. And I have the honor and the privilege of working with lots and lots of families, albeit under horrific conditions. And I say honor and a privilege because I have a child. I cannot imagine. I cannot imagine where I would be if something horrific like state-sponsored terror stole her from me. And these families, Mama J, Mama Perkins, Mama Wanda, mean, I could go on and on. The fight in them, and not just for their child, but for all children. Even after all these years of working with them is almost, I just love you so much. And I'm in such awe of you, Mama J, and what you've built and what you sacrificed for our folks. So anyway, I got a phone call from Mama J, who was so upset because she had gotten a phone call from this woman in Hollister whose father, an elder, had been brutally attacked by Masso during a traffic stop. And she Googled Masso and learned that he had come from Oakland, where he had murdered someone, right? And folks need to understand, like, we only hear about this many of the names, right? Police in this country kill upwards of 3 people every single day. And part of how murderous cops are allowed to remain murderous is because they make these lateral moves. And that's why we fought for 1420, so we could get the records of these police officers. Now, we should also talk about the fact that when 1420 passed, police departments across this state literally had bonfires, literally, where they took records into their parking lot and set them shits on fire, right, as a way to evade accountability. But Mama Jeralynn's fight and the way that the community banded around her, and it was all sorts of folks. It wasn't just your normal folks that were in the police accountability world. It was people from the religious world, from the advocacy world, from the environmental justice. Like, it was so egregious, and it united Oakland in a way that I don't know that I had seen since Oscar Grant, and I don't know that I have seen since. Yeah, I mean, I guess I just wanted to pull out those threads around lateral moves, around that they definitely talked about Alan as a suspect, and that actually that created an additional hurdle, because one of the things that we do as a people is that we buy into the state's narrative and we allow the state to tell us whether or not someone is worth fighting for or not.
Right.
And so when you're in an advocacy organization, and part of our job is to mobilize the people, right, to support the family in their fight for justice, if it gets out that they had a gun, or they maybe shot at the police, or maybe they, stole a piece of bubble gum from 7-Eleven 25 freaking years ago, people then use that as a way to justify not getting in the fight. And so that definitely was a hurdle that we had to overcome, because the initial response from Oakland was in fact lackluster, right? Until, of course, it came out that Masso had shot himself. And then we were able to garner community support. But like, I think about Charlene Tyndall, who was murdered by a BART police officer across the street from the station. The narrative to this day is that he had a gun, even though there's video that he did not. He was shot in front of his wife and child in the back. And our own people refused to stand up for Charlene. And that's why I said earlier, John, too, about communications for us is not just a tactic. It has always been a strategy. We have always been clear that we have to impact the media. We have to make our own media. We have to shift the narrative about what cops do and do not do, and what public safety should be and could be and is not under the current system. Because if we are just talking to ourselves, then nothing is ever going to change.
I think you're right. I think for legislation and stuff like that, you need a pretty big tent, and it has to be led by the people who are most impacted by it, and our role is to lift that up, amplify.
And so we started calling out reporters for their crap. When they called them suspects, we would send them a laundry list. His favorite color was blue. He played football. He went to church, all of that stuff, and force the narrative. And we've seen that shift here in Oakland. We've seen that shift here in Oakland, where they're telling the whole story. And if there is a story around state terror, state violence, police corruption, they at least now will call us to at least get our voices in there. They'll still repeat the state's propaganda bullshit, but they have to now at least have one of our voices inside of that story too. And that has made a difference.
Y'all have had a strong movement, and that's one step forward in a long journey. Claudia, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I first want to thank you, Ms. Blueford, for sharing your story and the story about your son, Alan. I'm always really, really happy when people center the humanness of these victims, because that's something that you don't often get to see. And so I love hearing about kind of who this person was, past, like, like the narrative that they push of the suspect. And so I want to thank you for sharing your story, you as well, Ms. Brooks, and for the work that both of y'all have done. As a psychology major and a future counselor, I'm really interested in the mental health aspect of it and the coping that kind of comes along with it. And so I was wondering, Ms. Jeralynn, if you could speak to kind of how that experience has been for you, if you don't mind.
Okay, say that one more time. I'm sorry.
No problem. Just how coping and your mental health has played a role in your advocacy work as well and fighting for justice.
Oh, whew. Well, it was a hard fall. I mean, I fell hard, and I had a nervous breakdown. I went to therapy twice a week. Like I said, I did everything in sadness and anger. So I walked in anger, I spoke in anger, I cried angrily. The only time that I would kind of just find my voice was when I was speaking about Alan. And I had to really dig deep, because nothing that I did, no one that I turned to, I mean, because listen, the police department is against you. We have one city official that voted with us. The entire city council, the mayor, the vice mayor, the city controller, the some of the big wigs in Oakland, they all decided to get behind the police, because Oakland police had a bad rap, very bad. And what they did was they decided that they were on the verge of being turned over to receivership with the federal government. And the federal judge that was overseeing the department, because he had put sanctions on them, spoke about Alan's case, because they were saying, well, we changed, we're gonna clean it up. They didn't. And that was driving me crazy, because I just couldn't understand why they couldn't own up to what they had done. Why would they take his side? Why would they listen? Why would the mayor come out and say, oh, well, we changed it, but now we're going to give the families a room? Like, that helped. None of it helped. And it would keep me up at night. It would make my stomach hurt. It would make me just nauseated. My daughter just shut down completely. She wouldn't talk. She was angry. She would say, I hate seeing my brother's face on a shirt, because that was her baby. My older son, he had a breakdown. He's dealing with mental wellness right now. We're still, because he didn't get a chance to really grieve his brother. And he took on, like, if I was there, this wouldn't have happened. And then he even got into it with the police, and the police was trying to arrest him, and they hit him in the head with a gun 12 times, busting his head, breaking his ankle, and he would not go down. He just kill me like you killed my brother. He wanted to die. And so mental illness, it affects everyone, included the cousins, the aunties, everybody. I mean, we were just, my mother got sick. I lost my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law within 2 weeks. My same sister-in-law that made a scrapbook and cut out every article, every action, everything we did. It just was so heavy. Our light had been dimmed. There was a little bit of light left, though. And I started to, like I said, I went through therapy, but I had to develop my relationship with God, because it took a higher power for me to bring me out from that darkness, to pull me up from that ground. And I started to try to, and it wasn't through a mentor or somebody. It was me saying, look, God, here I am. If you don't do this, then it's it. I'm out. And as I began to put my trust in the Lord, then he began to help me and I began to get stronger. And then I went back to school. I went to seminary school because I needed to really study the word and study, my relationship with God showed me that the Bible is the blueprint through life. And it's for everybody. You can, but it depends on what you need in your life. So I had to find out what I needed in my life. And it wasn't to roll over. It wasn't to give up. And the one thing that really started to bring me up was that scripture that said, I will live and not die. And when I said that, boy, I just put up my dukes and I just started swinging. And I swung and I swung. And the people of Hollister, as Kat was talking, they called me. We got them a lawyer to help them. I started making calls. I started coming together. We put on a national movement for a petition to get him fired. And this is all in the wake of George Floyd. And guess what? He puts out a whole article saying that he was justified, but at the same time, he's retiring because he do. So it was just, everything was kind of, my head has swam around, but if I didn't use my voice and take my stand and hold up my dukes, and I'm saying this in the literal sense, I would not be able to heal. And now I'm trying to heal my children. I'm trying to help them because my son is going through as a Black man, and my husband. A lot of times, so many families, marriages break up, that you blame this one, you feel guilty, you're living out of guilt and hurt and pain, and you can't, and you have to find a way. You have to find something, you have to find a source. And mine was God. And then the healing process began for me mentally. And now I'm even better. I can counsel a mother. I can help her. I was standing with her. I was fighting with her. But now I can come and appeal to her in a different way to help her to find her source and her force that will help her.
John, can I say just a little bit more about the trauma and our role?
Yeah, I was going to just remind all of us that we have about 5 minutes left. I was going to ask you to speak and then get Claria's final thoughts and then ask Ms. Blueford to carry us out.
Wonderful. Okay, I want to be mindful of time, so I want to say the most important thing. So the first thing is that if we don't address the trauma, right, that already was inside of us as Black and brown and poor and discarded people in this country, we were already walking with this, right? Then everything else that we're doing is putting Band-Aids on gunshot wounds. And so we've doubled down on our healing justice practices, right? For the organizers and the advocates that are in this movement, for the family members, and for the community at large. Because if you are Black or brown or an impacted family in this country, it doesn't matter if you're in the same city, if you knew the person. Every time we hear about someone else being murdered by law enforcement, right, we are triggered and we are traumatized. We also have spent the last 14 years, right, building up our family support model. And one of the things that organizations do is they say that they are family-led, but really what that means is that they trot families out to tell their stories over and over and over and over and over again at rallies or in meetings with policymakers or to media to push whatever agenda that is on the table, with zero consideration about what state that family member is in by the time they've told their story 25 times to 25 legislators, only 23 of which didn't care about anything the family had to say. And so it is our responsibility to provide healing modalities to the families that we work with. It is our responsibility as advocates and organizers to ensure that families have the skill sets, that they understand policy, that they understand the way a bill moves, that they understand how to talk in sound bites, that they have the skill sets to actually be at the forefront of this movement. And that we are always, always, always centering their trauma and the healing of that trauma. So we send healing justice folks to our lobby days. We have a weekly support group where we've got both licensed and unlicensed folks so they can walk them through their trauma. But too often we skip over that part, right? In the name of fighting for justice and as a whole in our movement. our movement for Black liberation, for brown liberation, for liberation of all oppressed peoples. We've got to be centering the healing from the trauma of white supremacy and the violence that comes with it.
Thank you. Clary, your final reflections?
Yes, again, I just want to thank you, Ms. Blueford, thank you, Ms. Brooks, and MAPB for, again, having me here tonight. I fully agree with addressing the trauma that comes with this, and the trauma that we all naturally have as well. That's something that is important for my research, because this research I plan on taking to my master's program in order to come up with kind of a framework for counseling for mothers who have been exposed, mothers and families who've experienced something like this. And so I'm all for it. I'm very new to this journey of advocacy and fighting, but I'm encouraged and I'm hopeful that I can continue on this path. And with organizations like Mothers Against Brutality, with mothers like Ms. Blueford that are willing to share their stories and willing to fight, and then with advocates like Ms. Brooks, who also dedicate their time and efforts to fighting, I think we can get there. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Blueford, do you want to take us out with some thoughts or maybe a prayer, word of prayer?
Okay, well, first, I just want to thank you. I want to thank Miss Colette. I want to thank my sister fellows. I want to thank my sister Kat. I want to thank each and every one that has come on as a panel to join the panel and listen. And I definitely want to thank you, Ms. Holmes, for your work, because it's going to be your work and your thesis that is going to be able to instruct others that come behind you. Now, I just finished my thesis, and my topic was, can social injustice be solved with theological methods? And to defend that with a panel of 4 Baptist preachers and 2 women that had no idea, they had no idea until I got into the meat and potatoes of what I was saying, because it is. I mean, injustice for me is injustice for all of us. So we have to keep that in the forefront, because we don't want any more Allens. We don't want any more Clintons. We don't want any more Jacobs or Jarvis or Henrys or Jordans or Corys or Carries or Marquis or Jabrils or Jarvis or any of them. We just don't want it. And if we don't change, we won't grow. And we have a bigger fight right now, because you see what the oath takers and the white supremacists, let me tell you, those people that was marching on January 6th, the few of them were retired Oakland police officers. They were servicemen, they were lawyers, they were doctors, they women. I mean, how can the Supreme Court justice wife pay for buses? So guess what? If she can do that, then we can do better, because we have God on our side and we have each other. If we stand in the unity of the faith, we can get this thing done. Nothing is too big. They said civil rights couldn't get passed, but guess what? Social injustice is going to be at the forefront. It's not just when somebody dies, it's going to be on the tip of their tongue whenever they talk about change, improvement, empowerment, because I'm going to make sure. Now, if you can do me a favor, I would like to end in prayer, because I am a chaplain. That is my job. And if we stand together in the unity of the faith, trust me, God is going to make sure that we can do all that he gives us, because he can do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. I ask for justice. My justice is coming. I know that, but I just don't know when. And that's okay. I can be still and wait. So if you could just bow your head with me. Father, we just thank you for this day, God, for this is the day that you have made. And God, I rejoice and I'm glad in it. And I thank you for this panel, God. I thank you for the privilege and the opportunity, God. I thank you, God, for your word that is a light, a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. And it says that where 2 or 3 are gathered together in your name, you are in the midst of them. So we thank you, God, for being in the midst, God. We thank you, God, for charging your angels of protection around each and every one of us, each and every one of our family members, from the oldest to the youngest. Now, God, we ask for your grace and mercy right now as we carry on the fight, God, as you heal our broken hearts and you bind up our wounds, God. We say thank you right now. And God, I'm speaking for those who are hurting today, God. Heal their hearts, God. Heal them, oh Lord, and they shall be healed. And God, that is my prayer for today. And I want to give you glory and honor and praise. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank all of you for being with us tonight. I just want to remind the audience from on the West Coast and from the middle of the country and on the East Coast that at 12 noon and 7 p.m. Central Time, we'll be having programs the rest of the week. You can go to Facebook, MAPB's Facebook page, and find a link to view any of the programs. Thanks again, Ms. Blueford, Ms. Brooks, Ms. Holmes. I appreciate all of what y'all are doing, and it was good to be with you. Good night, everybody.